Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1,000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach in the video to follow. Could the 5 special war powers defeat Soul King Yhwach in an epic final battle at the end of Bleach? If all 5 of these extraordinary Shinigami, so that's Ichigo Kurosaki, Kenpachi Zaraki, Ichibei Hyosebe, Sosuke Aizen, and Kisuke Urahara, each of whom was designated by the Quincy King himself as a person of interest to the Vandenreich's war effort, someone whose potential impact was unquantifiable and therefore impossible to truly prepare for and guard against, if they all came together and waged war against Bleach's all-powerful final boss, could they possibly hope to achieve victory? What does each member of the 5 war powers bring to the fight? And how useful are they in the grand scheme of the battle? Today, I want to dive into what a showdown between the 5 special war powers and Yhwach after he's awakened the Almighty and absorbed the power of the Soul King for himself might actually look like. And above all else, ask the question of whether or not the 5 of them, let's face it, really stand a chance at all. Of course, these characters are all immensely strong and capable in their own right, but Soul King Yhwach is arguably, is it even arguable, the single strongest and certainly the most broken character in the entire manga. So, without further ado, let's dive into this hypothetical final battle. Let me know down in the comments whether you think the special war powers can win, or if they fall before the might of Yhwach's divine power. Remember that if you enjoy Bleach content like this and you want to see more every single week, the best place to support me, aside from just being here on YouTube, is over on Patreon, the link to which you can find in the description below. Any support over there is greatly appreciated, and it is really helping to keep the lights on here on the channel. So again, thank you to all my Patreon supporters, and thank all of you for watching and being here. It really does mean absolutely everything. So, to begin, who are the 5 special war powers? The thing is, the majority of these characters weren't selected by Yhwach for their strength alone, or in some cases even at all. Ichigo was chosen for his latent, frankly immeasurable, and mostly still untapped ability. The fact that he has the potential to be significantly stronger than virtually every single Shinigami in the Gotei 13. Then there's Kenpachi Zaraki, who was picked for his combat prowess or fighting ability, a man strong enough to bear the title of the current Kenpachi, and who seems unmatched on the battlefield. Ichibei Hyosebe was chosen for a slightly more abstract reason: his wisdom, his ability to know all, as both a result of his extraordinary age and the unique powers bestowed upon him by the Soul King. Then there's Sosuke Aizen, who was selected for his Reiatsu. Reiatsu specifically being the pressure exerted through a Shinigami's Reryoku, or spirit energy. Aizen's Reiatsu is of course infamous for being so enormous, so dense, and so powerful that he can literally disintegrate other beings in his proximity. And finally, there's Kisuke Urahara, chosen by Yhwach for his incalculable means, a near impossible level of resourcefulness and forward thinking, a schemer who will always evade and outmaneuver the enemy thanks to his unparalleled intellect, allowing him to adapt his strategies to command the battlefield. And of course, we know as well what these characters are capable of. Ichigo's true power may yet be undiscovered, but simply acquiring his real Zanpakuto made him a near unstoppable force to be reckoned with, capable of fighting off 8 Stern Ritter at once without even breaking a sweat, and of course in the anime, overcoming Yhwach's Zankt Swinger, supposedly the strongest defensive Quincy spell known to them, with his new ability Getsuga Jujisho. His mere Reiatsu destroyed the castle of Silburn, and as he embarks on his newest journey yet, trying to master the newfound equilibrium in his powers, he can now draw upon specific elements of his perfect hybrid design, such as when he draws out his hollow powers to conjure the Horn of Salvation. Kenpachi now has access to his bankai, which was strong enough to carve through Gerard Valkyrie's shield, throw the giant from the side of Varvelt, split him in two, and yes, tear his arm off, with nothing more than Kenpachi's teeth. And it was fast enough to accomplish all of this before Gerard's aforementioned arm could even fully regenerate, which previously happened in an instant, meaning Kenpachi is moving at an unbelievable, blistering speed. Meanwhile, Ichibei might have the single most busted Zanpakuto in the entire series, with Ichimonji practically allowing him to rewrite the world and its inhabitants as he sees fit. Simply by splashing ink with his Shikai, Ichibei can strip even the strongest of foes of all of their power, and then use his bankai to rewrite their properties entirely. On top of this is a man who heralds from the primordial age, and who stands atop the Shinigami as not just their apex, but someone who goes even further beyond that, having mastered everything a Shinigami can at the same time. Then there's Aizen, who at one point shattered the boundaries between Shinigami and Hollow, transcending to the point where his Reiatsu was so immense it would destroy almost anything it came into contact with. Himself a master of the Shinigami arts also, and with another extremely powerful Zanpakuto in Kyoku Suigetsu, whose Kanzen Saimin or complete hypnosis controls all 5 senses pretty much flawlessly. Even before the Hogyoku began to remake his soul, Aizen was capable of taking out captain-level Shinigami with a single swing of his blade. And now, with the Hogyoku still embedded in his chest, Aizen is apparently immortal. And finally, we have Kisuke, the smartest man in Bleach, whose effective future sight, through his impeccable planning, allowed him to take down the aforementioned Aizen, and be one of the key drivers of the Soul Society's entire war effort against Yhwach. Seemingly no matter the situation, Kisuke will have thought of something, multiple things, to counter his enemy. But he's more than just his intellect. Kisuke is one of the most skilled and adept Shinigami ever, also having a mastery of the combat arts and a bankai that allows him to remake reality around him, transforming him into the ultimate lord of control on the battlefield. And again, that planning is so all-encompassing that it really feels like he is an avatar for Kubo himself. I mean, that's a pretty stellar lineup, right? It all sounds pretty great. It's true, yes, that while all 5 of these characters are unquestionably extremely strong, they weren't all designated as threats by Yhwach specifically because of their power. But the truth is that they are genuinely among the strongest characters in the series. Honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to find a tougher unit to come up against. Before we continue, consider hitting subscribe down below to help push this channel to 300,000 subs. We're 15,000 subs away. I'd love to make it by the end of the year. It's only going to be doable with your help, so please hit that button. It's quick, it's easy, and it's free, and it does help out enormously, so thank you all so very much. But then on the other side, there's Yhwach. Now, 5 against 1 might seem totally unfair, but Yhwach, specifically the variant of Yhwach who has absorbed the Soul King's power, the final boss, is the single strongest character in Bleach. The funny thing is, Yhwach himself isn't that broken in the grand scheme of things. I mean, he is. He's extraordinarily powerful in every sense of the word, though that scale itself has been thrown out of whack thanks to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc in general. But without the Almighty, as we see in both his battle against Ichibei and Ichigo, he can be defeated, and without too much trouble. Certainly, his ability to freely give and take power is probably the most busted thing about him. But the Almighty, which in itself is technically a Soul King ability, is the most powerful ability in Bleach, and makes Yhwach virtually unstoppable. With the Almighty, Yhwach can see into the future and alter it however he likes. Were he simply only able to see into the future, it wouldn't be so bad, and honestly I think he would lose to these 5. There is a difference, after all, a sizable difference, between just being able to see what someone is going to do next, and being able to do something about it. But it's that extra step, the power to change the future, that makes Yhwach nigh undefeatable, regardless of who he's going up against. Because, of course, the problem is, it's the one power that trumps all other powers in Bleach. It's the one power that no other ability can stand up to, that no other ability has an answer to, because it doesn't matter what your power is in the face of someone who can change what is yet to come. Meaning Yhwach is effectively writing the story and laying the groundwork himself. Everyone else is merely dancing to the beat of his drum. And it's not even just the fact that Yhwach can see the future, it's that he can see all futures, all the time, every single possible result and path, alternate paths laid bare before him like billions of grains of sand. So, the Almighty is, I would say, pretty obviously the biggest problem here. And we've seen what this power is capable of. We've also seen that it even has a few weaknesses, in quotes. Yhwach can't see the actions of the Soul King himself due to the Soul King's own power superseding his son's. Due to the Almighty being an optical power, it is susceptible to the effects of Aizen's Kyoku Suigetsu, and it can be circumvented to some degree by Tsukishima's Book of the End and its ability to rewrite the past and create a splinter reality that Yhwach hasn't yet seen. But ultimately, and the reason I was even hesitant to call them weaknesses, is because outside of the Soul King escaping Yhwach's gaze, which is a genuine disadvantage, none of the others are really weaknesses in the truest sense, because although they are, I guess, exploits, they still ultimately can't overcome the Almighty. As we see in the manga, Aizen's Kyoku Suigetsu completely clouds and deceives Yhwach's vision. Although we don't know for certain, it is safe to assume the reason Aizen's power worked on Yhwach's holistically, the reason it was able to cover all possible futures, is because Yhwach was placed under Kyoku Suigetsu's spell prior to activating the Almighty, back in the first invasion. And so it's like a shroud has been placed over his eyes before he gained that power. By the time he opened his eyes properly and could see all, well, the shroud was already there, waiting. As such, it was able to capture all of the futures Yhwach could see as soon as he could see them, rather than simply one future had Aizen used it on Yhwach in the moment. And so actually, before we even truly begin, Aizen, having used Kyoku Suigetsu on Yhwach before the Quincy King gains the power of the Almighty, is kind of a prerequisite to them even standing a chance. Anyway, despite that, despite Aizen's power succeeding, allowing Ichigo to actually sneak up on Yhwach and kill him with the Getsuga Tensho, Yhwach comes back to life because he rewrites the future in which he dies. This is probably the single craziest act in the entire series, to be totally honest, as like I said, this is the catalyst that makes Yhwach unbeatable, without some kind of specific mechanic. In this instance, that came in the form of the still silver arrow. And even then, in the manga, it is never explained how Yhwach doesn't see said arrow coming, and I'm hoping the anime will fix that. But here, despite Yhwach not being able to see the true future until probably the moment Aizen reappears in front of him, the true Aizen, at that point he's then able to see Ichigo dealing the finishing blow, and then his own death. Mere seconds before it actually happens, so he then just rewrites the part where he dies instead to say, well, I come back to life. I'm assuming it all happens that quickly, so fast in fact that he doesn't have time to rewrite the future to stop Ichigo from stabbing him through the back. He doesn't have the time to do that, so he has to think, well, I kind of have to accept this is going to happen. I'm going to be cut in half, but at the very least I can rewrite my death after the fact. Had he had even a little more time, he probably would have rewritten the future to break Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu once again, so that the blades snapped on contact. Of course, the inherently paradoxical issue with this power is if he can really see the future in its entirety, why didn't he see what happens next? Why didn't he then see, after reviving himself, that Uryu shows up and shoots him with an arrow? Now, after that, it's fair to say that he wouldn't have been able to see anything. But that would have surely given him cause for concern. The moment he gets hit by something in the back, presumably he doesn't see what in the future, his vision suddenly cuts out. And you think that would be a cause for concern. Did he simply not feel a need to look that far ahead as he thought he'd already won? But speaking of the Almighty being a power of the Soul King, well, what about the Soul King's actual power? And this is where things get a little bit weird, in my opinion, because the manga doesn't do a brilliant job of illustrating exactly what it is Yhwach gains as a result of absorbing the Soul King. After absorbing his father's power, or some of it anyway, whatever he can manage to contain, Yhwach is now constantly overflowing with Black Reiatsu, the power of Ryo himself. He can freely control this power and wield it as a weapon, even while sitting down and unmoving. It's like an extension of his body. And actually, I think that is shown in the design of the character himself. What used to be a black cloak is now effectively just a waterfall of Ryo's surplus power that has effectively transformed Yhwach's body into said power. But more so than that, Yhwach's own power seems to have been enormously amplified. After acquiring his father's power, Yhwach just kind of destroys the roof of the royal palace simply by exerting his spirit energy, and then uses that same newfound power to not only restructure the entire royal palace itself, but to lift the Vandenreich landscape up from the Serete and into the sky, transforming it all into Varvelt. It's interesting because this isn't just an extension of a Quincy's ability to dominate Reishi, though it might appear so. He quite literally moves the physical landscape up into the heavens, and the anime actually makes things a little more explicit here, showing Yhwach using the Soul King's Black Reiatsu almost like tethers to drag the Quincy buildings up into the sky. So it's fair to say this power also comes with a general boost to Yhwach himself as well, as you'd expect. And as far as I can tell, Yhwach can also use all of his original Quincy powers too, though he seems to mostly choose not to after absorbing the Soul King, save for generating his Reishi broadsword. So, looking at the landscape of the 5 special war powers versus Yhwach, well, what do we actually know? How would this fight go down? Now, 3 of the 5 do actually fight Yhwach in the manga, while 2 of them fight this Soul King-infused variant, so we do have some idea of how a battle could possibly go. Like I said earlier, Ichibei fights Yhwach before he has the Almighty and utterly demolishes him. And yet from the second Yhwach awakens the Almighty, Ichibei is defeated. In hindsight, this is a little strange when you think about it. A number of characters, many of whom are almost certainly weaker than Ichibei, perform much better against even the Soul King enhanced Yhwach than Ichibei does against this version of the Quincy King. And here, Yhwach kills Ichibei just by blowing him up and then proceeds to never do that to anyone ever again. What I'm getting at is, if Ichibei had actually been given the chance to fight Yhwach for as long as the others that face him later on do, he likely would have fared better than they do, even if the Almighty means that even Ichimonji's power is useless. Perhaps that's why Yhwach blew Ichibei up like he did. He knew that even giving him a chance to counterattack could have been dangerous. But then in a fight example that's even more germane to this discussion, we have the very final showdown of Bleach, where 2 of the special war powers, Ichigo and Aizen, along with Renji and then later Uryu, come together to fight Soul King Yhwach at the very end of the world. Together, Ichigo and Aizen are able to perform pretty well, with Aizen using Kyokusuigetsu to trap Yhwach, confounding his almighty gaze and allowing Ichigo to then stab the villain through the back before ripping him in 2 with a colossal Getsuga and seemingly ending the fight. Again, this kind of reinforces the idea that without the Almighty backing him up, even the Soul King empowered Yhwach is able to be defeated. And Ichigo being capable of taking him out in a single hit with his true bankai is a testament to the reason why he was made a special war power in the first place. This is an unfathomable level of destructive power, the likes of which only a perfect hybrid, a Soul King candidate himself, could achieve. The thing is, Aizen obviously puts himself in harm's way. He puts himself on the line to face Yhwach here while waiting for Ichigo to arrive, and he gets pretty messed up as a result. Yhwach rips off Aizen's arm and punches his hand right through Aizen's chest, so were it not for the Hogyoku, Aizen would be in real trouble. It's hard to know exactly what Aizen's immortality truly means. Could Yhwach not just tear him apart limb by limb as he was doing here until there's nothing left? I mean, he plucks Aizen's arm off like it's nothing. Either way, as I said before, while these two together are capable of actually killing Soul King Yhwach, which in itself is extremely impressive, they ultimately don't win without the intervention of the still silver arrow, as Yhwach is able to resurrect himself in the future. So where does that leave us? With all that said and done, what does a fight between the 5 special war powers and Soul King Yhwach really look like? Is it just going to be similar to Ichigo and Aizen versus Yhwach, but bigger in scope? The ending may be exactly the same. You know, without the still silver arrow to remove Yhwach's almighty completely, victory seems impossible. I'll be honest, of the 5, I think Kenpachi is going to be pretty useless here. His bankai is obscenely powerful and absurdly fast, yes, but at the time of the final battle, he's unable to control his full strength. Perhaps he can't even get anywhere close to it, as his body is simply not ready for such a power boost, and breaks under the heavy strain. So he's limited to fighting Yhwach as he was fighting Gerard, and while his bankai admittedly tore Gerard apart, we never saw it in action against Gerard's Volstendish, until apparently the anime. While we only have the one shot from the trailer to currently go on, it looks like Kenpachi's bankai may not be able to break through Volstendish Gerard's Blue Vein, which I think is going to feel like a bit of a downgrade to Nozarashi's overall performance, but maybe we can find a role for him anyway. I hate to say it, but I'm also not sure how much Ichibei brings to the table, for one reason alone. We've already seen that his power, even in Bankai, Shirafude Ichimonji, which should totally be able to rewrite a character's properties, wasn't able to overcome the Almighty. And instead, Yhwach changed the future to strip himself of Shirafude's ink and his new name. Now, I'll be honest, this always felt like nonsense, and even after the anime has tried to clear things up a bit, basically by saying the Almighty just activates at the moment of Yhwach's demise, apparently no matter what, because of what Ichibei said to him 1,000 years ago. It still doesn't seem to make sense to me. You know, Yhwach's name, his power, it was all gone, replaced with Black Ant. There shouldn't be anywhere for the Almighty to surface from anymore. It's all gone. It should have been wiped away because, according to Ichibei at least, and based on everything we see, names are power, and Yhwach had no name and had no power. But it manages to return, despite technically no longer existing once Yhwach's name had been erased. However, I'm not content with that, and I'm not convinced that this is all Ichibei has to offer. In fact, I think that Ichimonji could potentially be a sleeper big player in this fight moving forward. Obviously, as well as his Zanpakuto, Ichibei is a master of the Shinigami combat arts to a degree the likes of which we've never seen, so even if Ichimonji was rendered useless, he would be able to provide incredible support. But going back to Ichimonji, as I really think there's something here, what happens if Yhwach is hit with Ichimonji's ink once the Almighty is already active? The reason the ending of his fight with Ichibei is so dubious, so nebulous, is because he didn't have the Almighty until that very moment. And in fact, the anime kind of reinforces this idea. As I said a minute ago, the anime makes it seem like the Almighty would have activated no matter what. But if the Almighty is already awakened, and then Yhwach is splashed with ink, would he lose his power? Similarly to how he loses it when hit with the still silver arrow. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've just been through this. He can rewrite the future to remove the ink. Yes, but what if he didn't know the ink was coming? Say we play out the battle, and Aizen uses Kyoka Suigetsu to trick Yhwach, but instead of Ichigo stabbing him, Ichibei comes in and covers him in black ink. Yhwach didn't see it coming, didn't know it was coming, and therefore, would his powers not just immediately disappear? I feel like that could be a potential win condition, right? So actually, Ichibei does have a potentially gigantic part to play after all. We'll get back to that in a moment. Moving on though, we have Kisuke, and he is a tricky one. Like Kenpachi before him, Kisuke isn't transcendent, or technically anywhere close. They are both at the very pinnacle of what it means to be a Shinigami, for differing reasons, but they don't really come close, in my opinion anyway, of being capable of duking it out with Soul King Yhwach. It's on a completely different level, just in the same way Renji was instantly removed from the battle. That being said, if there is a loophole to be found in the Almighty's power, Kisuke will find it. Kisuke will be the one to discover Yhwach's weakness. Look, I don't necessarily think Kisuke would be a huge help on the battlefield in a straightforward manner, but I think he might be the ultimate support unit. If they know what they're up against and they have time to prepare beforehand, then Kisuke will come up with multiple strategies, and one of them might be just what they need. For example, if Kisuke comes up with the plan of using Kyoka Suigetsu to get close to Yhwach after Aizen confirms the power does in fact work, then it could be Kisuke who helps someone like Ichigo or Ichibei get in close, perhaps by using his bankai to create a pathway to Yhwach, just as he does against Askin. The main issue facing Kisuke is a pretty big one, and it's the simple fact that how do you plan for the Almighty? For all his intellect, Kisuke can't literally see the future like Yhwach can. So there's only so much he can do. I guess he could work under the assumption that Yhwach will see certain things, that he will change certain things, and so he might operate a strategy based on what he wants Yhwach to see, distracting him with something in one hand while maneuvering something to kill the Quincy King in the other. Kisuke is the trickiest one on this list in my opinion, because although the odds do seem impossible, the last thing you want to do is underestimate him. Which of course leaves Ichigo and Aizen, the two special war powers who actually fight Yhwach in the manga, so we have a decent idea of what they can do. And I'm just going to come out and say it, Aizen is the most vital player of the five of them. Kyoka Suigetsu is the only confirmed workaround they have to Yhwach's all-seeing eyes, so it's only through Aizen that they have a chance of even reaching Yhwach in the first place. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think they might actually be able to win, but it kind of all rests on whether or not Ichimonji does in fact work like the Still Silver Arrow, at least on a baseline level. If it genuinely would rob Yhwach of his power completely. Kenpachi and Ichigo are the decoys. They fight Yhwach alongside Aizen and distract his eyes. In reality, however, Aizen has Yhwach under Kyoka Suigetsu's spell, and in secret, Kisuke uses his bankai to help move Ichibei into position. Even if Yhwach discovers the ruse, it may very well be too late. Ichibei emerges from Kisuke's bankai and covers him in ink, momentarily blotting out the Almighty and stripping him of his power. In that moment, Ichigo, using his true bankai, Tensa Zangetsu, delivers the finishing blow, and hopefully kills Yhwach for good. In fact, scratch that last part where I said even if Yhwach discovers the ruse, it's too late. That's not true. If Yhwach discovers the ruse, he will survive. Just as he did in the manga. Ichibei has to splash him with ink without him seeing it coming, without him seeing Ichibei. As long as that happens, As long as Yhwach is suddenly hit with ink and he had no idea it was coming at all, I think he could be defeated. It's kind of funny when you go back to the manga, because it kind of feels like the only reason Yhwach was able to resurrect himself from death was because he knew that suddenly it was the real Ichigo behind him. If Aizen had managed to maintain the illusion until Yhwach was cut in two, I think it might have been over. Would all of this actually work? Truth be told, I'm not sure. I kind of feel like it should. There's no real room for the Almighty to exploit a loophole like there was in the Ichibei fight originally, where it seemed to kind of just supersede everything. Like I said, in the manga, Yhwach somehow doesn't see the still silver arrow coming, and as soon as it hits him, it robs him of his power. Why wouldn't Ichimonji be capable of doing the exact same thing, so long as it wasn't visible in any of Yhwach's futures? By the time Yhwach even knew about it, his powers would have been blacked out. If Ichibei removes the name the Almighty, I guess by splashing Yhwach's eyes, he would lose that power, correct? Really what we're doing is replacing the still silver arrow with Ichimonji, and that requires a much trickier and more elaborate setup to make work, especially since the still silver arrow, like I said, was unexplained in how it worked and how it reached him. But I feel like this could work. The reality is the deck is thoroughly stacked against them, even if all 5 of these Shinigami come together, combining their power, their skill, and their expertise. The Almighty must be stopped if they are to win, and this kind of feels like maybe the only way to do that. Unless we get really wild and Urahara somehow uses his bankai to restructure Yhwach's eyes, thus removing the Almighty completely. Again, all of this would have to happen before Yhwach saw it. Again, would that be doable before he rewrote the future? I don't know, but honestly, this has the potential to be a really cool fight. So I'm going to say, as for my verdict, that actually I think they could defeat him. But it all has to play out absolutely perfectly, and Ichibei has to strike him with Ichimonji's ink without him having any idea, literally up until the moment the ink touches his flesh. Other than that, I don't think there's any chance they can win. Alright guys, but that's it for today's video. Let me know your thoughts on this fun hypothetical fight down in the comments below. Could the 5 special war powers all working together defeat Soul King Yhwach? It feels pretty unlikely to me, but I think there might be an avenue for success to be found here. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Am I completely off base, or maybe I'm right, maybe you agree? I'd love to know, so do please let me know. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. If you want to help support the channel, if you like getting Bleach videos like this every single week, click subscribe down below. It's one of the easiest and one of the best ways to support the channel. It does help out enormously. Of course, check out the Patreon as well if you want to take the support another step further. A huge thank you to everyone doing that. It is massively appreciated. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.